It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the quiet suburban community of Willow Creek, a place known more for its manicured lawns, white picket fences, and strict HOA rules than any real excitement. I was cruising down Maple Drive on my bike, enjoying the cool breeze and the fleeting moments of peace that came with a late spring ride. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and traffic was light. Then, out of nowhere, flashing lights appeared behind me. Not the usual police cruiser, but something different. Two men in what looked like uniformed shirts with patches and badges on their sleeves pulled up alongside me in a marked SUV emblazoned with HOA security on the doors. Their windows rolled down and one of them waved me to the side of the road. I slowed and stopped, raising my hands to signal compliance but feeling a flicker of unease. The idea of an HOA having security was nothing new. Several neighborhoods had patrols to enforce community rules. But something about this felt different. These guys weren't just checking a membership card or reminding residents about parking rules. They were pulling people over. The taller man approached, his tone clipped and authoritative. "License and registration, please," he demanded. I blinked. "I'm on a bike. I don't carry those." He didn't seem to care. "We have reports of unauthorized bikes riding in the neighborhood. We need to verify." I raised an eyebrow. "Unauthorized bikes? This is a public street. There's no such thing." He narrowed his eyes, pulling out a small handheld radio. "You need to cooperate, sir." Something clicked in me. The situation was escalating beyond a simple HOA patrol. These men were acting like law enforcement officers. And then it hit me. I was being stopped by fake cops. What made it surreal was that I'm not just any resident. I'm Marcus Ellis, Chief of Police for the city of Fairhaven. I'm the guy who trains officers on proper procedure, the one who handles public relations and works to keep the peace. And yet, here I was, being pulled over by private security, acting like law enforcement, on my own bike, in my own neighborhood. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge and ID. "I think you need to know who you're stopping." The man's expression shifted from confident to uncertain. His partner glanced nervously at their SUV. Before I could say more, they started backpedaling. "We were just doing our job," the shorter man muttered. "There's been reports of suspicious activity." I nodded slowly. Suspicious activity doesn't give you the right to stop and demand papers. That's police work, and you're not the police. The encounter ended with a tense apology and a hasty retreat, but the feeling lingered long after they drove off. How had private security been empowered to act like officers, stopping residents without cause or legal authority? And more importantly, what kind of message did this send to the community? Over the next few days, I began to uncover a growing trend. HOAs across the country increasingly hiring private security firms and granting them expanded powers to patrol neighborhoods, issue citations, and enforce rules. In some cases, these security officers even dressed like police, complete with badges, uniforms, and marked vehicles. This blurring of lines wasn't just confusing, it was dangerous. Residents were being intimidated, their rights overlooked, all under the guise of community safety. But what made my situation unique was my position. As police chief, I had the authority, the knowledge, and the platform to challenge this growing overreach. That initial stop wasn't just an inconvenient traffic delay, it was a wake-up call, a sign that the balance between private authority and public law enforcement was tipping dangerously, and a reminder that even those sworn to uphold the law can be caught off guard by the misuse of power. I decided then and there that I wouldn't let this slide. I owed it to my community, my city, and to the principles I'd sworn to protect, to shine a light on these fake cops and make sure everyone understood the limits of HOA authority. What followed would become a battle not just for my own dignity, but for the rights of every resident who had ever been stopped, questioned, or intimidated by those who thought they could enforce rules without legal backing. Because in Willow Creek and communities everywhere, no one should be stopped by someone pretending to be the law. The days following the unexpected stop were a whirlwind of disbelief and reflection. How did a routine bike ride turn into an encounter with what I could only describe as fake cops? And more puzzling, how had I, the police chief, become their target? I'm Marcus Ellis, Chief of Police in Fairhaven, a city not far from Willow Creek. I've spent years building trust with my community, leading by example, and upholding the law with integrity. Yet here I was, pulled over on a bicycle by private security officers, masquerading as law enforcement. At first, I assumed it was a case of mistaken identity or a simple misunderstanding, but as I dug deeper, it became clear that the problem ran much deeper. It all started with a routine patrol by the HOA's private security firm, contracted to enforce community rules and maintain safety in Willow Creek. They were authorized to monitor the neighborhood, issue warnings for parking violations, noise complaints, and other infractions spelled out in the HOA bylaws. But somewhere along the line, someone at the HOA decided to give the security team more power than their contract legally allowed. They outfitted their officers with uniforms and badges that looked eerily official, painted their SUVs to resemble police vehicles, and trained them to stop residents under vague pretenses like suspicious activity or unauthorized vehicles. This unauthorized authority created a dangerous gray area, a murky zone where residents couldn't easily tell friend from foe, neighbor from enforcer. And I was caught in the crossfire. The day they stopped me, I was on my usual route, pedaling along Maple Drive. It was a beautiful afternoon, and I was enjoying a rare moment of downtime. Suddenly, two SUVs with flashing lights pulled up, and before I knew it, I was being ordered to stop. What made it worse was the way they treated me. Not as a fellow public servant, but as a suspect. They demanded my license and registration, even though I was riding a bike. When I explained who I was and showed them my badge, they hesitated, almost caught off guard. It was clear they hadn't expected to pull over the police chief. But why was I singled out? As I started asking questions around the neighborhood, I learned that I wasn't the only one being stopped or questioned by the HOA security team. Residents reported being harassed for minor infractions, kids riding bikes in the wrong place, teens hanging out after curfew, visitors parking too long. The security officers seemed to be acting like a local police force, often without cause or proper authority. In some cases, residents described the security team as aggressive, intimidating, and overbearing. They claimed the officers threatened fines, called the police unnecessarily, and sometimes even followed people home. The HOA board justified their tactics by citing a rise in petty crime and vandalism in nearby communities. They insisted that the security team's enhanced presence was necessary to protect property values and keep Willow Creek safe. But the way they were going about it, dressing like cops, stopping residents without legal cause, was crossing a line. My encounter with them was, in many ways, a symptom of this larger problem. Then I discovered something else. The security firm's contract with the HOA was deliberately vague. It didn't clearly limit what the officers could or couldn't do. The HOA board had given them leeway, and the security company was exploiting that. That ambiguity created confusion, not just for residents, but for the security officers themselves. Without proper training or clear guidelines, they blurred the lines between community patrol and law enforcement. Meanwhile, the real police department, my department, was left out of the loop. The security officers sometimes called us to intervene in situations they escalated unnecessarily. And when we arrived, it became obvious they had no authority to detain or stop anyone. The more I investigated, the more I realized how dangerous this arrangement was. It undermined public trust in legitimate law enforcement, confused residents about who was responsible for their safety, and risked violating constitutional rights. And I was the one who had to fix it. Being targeted by the HOA security was a wake-up call. It wasn't personal. It was systemic. They weren't just stopping the wrong bike. They were stepping on the toes of the law itself. That realization sparked a determination in me to hold these private enforcers accountable, to clarify the legal boundaries, and to protect residents from overreach. But first, I had to navigate the messy politics of HOA boards, private security companies, and community fears. The path forward wouldn't be easy. The moment I realized that the men who stopped me were not actual police officers, but private security personnel employed by the Homeowners Association, a flood of questions came rushing to mind. Who were these people? What gave them the right to act like law enforcement? And how had the lines between community oversight and police authority become so dangerously blurred? HOAs have become a fixture in many suburban and gated communities, tasked with maintaining shared amenities, enforcing community rules, and preserving property values. Many have private security firms patrolling the neighborhoods, watching for trespassers, vandalism, or disturbances. But the authority of these security personnel is often limited and well-defined. Usually they're observers, not enforcers with arrest powers. In Willow Creek, however, things were different. The HOA had contracted a private security company called Sentinel Guardians to patrol the neighborhood. On paper, Sentinel's job was simple: keep an eye out for rule violations, suspicious activity, and any disturbances. But the reality, as I was beginning to see, was far more complicated. Sentinel's officers arrived in SUVs painted to resemble police vehicles, complete with faux emergency lights and decals that mimicked official badges. Their uniforms featured badges and patches that looked nearly identical to those worn by municipal officers. This wasn't just a uniform, it was a costume designed to convey authority. To an average resident, it would be difficult to tell the difference between Sentinel's officers and the city police. More troubling was the training, or lack thereof, that these officers received. Unlike sworn police officers who undergo rigorous training in law enforcement, constitutional rights, and use of force, Sentinel's employees were trained primarily in HOA rules enforcement, private security tactics, and basic conflict management. There was no academy, no certification as peace officers, no legal authority to detain or arrest. Yet, armed with their intimidating presence and faux badges, these officers took it upon themselves to stop residents, demand identification, and in some cases issue citations or warnings that felt indistinguishable from police orders. I spoke with a few Sentinel employees anonymously to understand their perspective. Many believed they had authority akin to police officers. Some even told me they had been encouraged by the HOA board to act decisively to maintain order. One officer admitted that the line between security guard and law enforcement had blurred for him. "We're the eyes and ears of the HOA. If we don't act, who will? People listen to us because we look the part." That mindset was dangerous. Security officers have no constitutional authority to stop, question, or detain citizens beyond the limited scope allowed for private citizens. Overstepping that boundary violates civil rights and can lead to legal repercussions. I also learned that Sentinel's contract with the HOA was deliberately vague on enforcement powers. The board had empowered them to patrol and enforce community rules, but provided no specific guidelines or oversight. This lack of clear direction gave Sentinel's officers room to interpret their role broadly, sometimes to the point of impersonating law enforcement. There were even reports from residents who claimed that Sentinel's officers had called local police to back up when they encountered resistance, escalating minor disputes into police matters unnecessarily. This blurring of lines was eroding public trust, not only in the HOA but also in legitimate police forces. As police chief, I knew that clear boundaries must be maintained to protect both residents and officers. Private security has a role in community safety, but that role must be transparent and legally compliant. The use of uniforms, vehicles, and tactics that mimic police can cause confusion, fear, and abuse of power. It became apparent that Willow Creek's HOA had crossed that line. The imposter's authority wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a systemic failure to recognize the limits of private enforcement and respect for individual rights. With this knowledge, I began preparing to confront the HOA and Sentinel. I gathered legal opinions, reviewed local and state statutes, and consulted with other law enforcement leaders who had faced similar issues. I realized that the problem wasn't just about one bad encounter. It was about reclaiming the rule of law in our community. Because when private actors start acting like cops without authority, everyone loses. And the first step to fixing that was shining a light on who these HOA enforcers really were. The day of the confrontation arrived sooner than I had expected. After gathering evidence, consulting with legal experts, and documenting the numerous complaints from residents, I felt prepared. But no amount of preparation could quite erase the tension that built up the moment I faced the HOA security officers again, the very same ones who had stopped me on my bike. It was early on a Saturday morning when I decided to visit the Sentinel Guardian's headquarters, an unassuming office tucked into a small strip mall a few miles from Willow Creek. I wanted to speak directly with their management to make clear my concerns about the overreach and the confusion their officers were causing in the community. As I entered the office, a uniformed officer at the front desk gave me a cautious glance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but guarded. "I'm here to speak with the manager," I replied. "My name is Marcus Ellis, Chief of Police in Fairhaven. I'm here regarding some serious concerns about your officer's conduct." The man's eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised but not quite ready to believe me. "The police chief of Fairhaven?" he asked, still skeptical. I nodded and showed him my badge and identification. "That's correct. I'm also a resident of Willow Creek, and I have first-hand experience with your officer's behavior." The office manager soon joined us, a middle-aged woman with an air of authority, but also defensiveness. She listened as I calmly explained the incidents, my own stop on the bike, reports from other residents, and the way their officers' uniforms and vehicles were causing confusion. "I understand your concerns," she said carefully, "but our officers are here to protect the community and enforce HOA rules. We have a responsibility to maintain order." "Yes, but your responsibility does not include impersonating law enforcement," I responded. "Your officers don't have the authority to stop residents, demand IDs, or act as police. That's not just illegal, it's dangerous." The conversation grew tense. The manager defended her team, insisting they were trained to handle situations professionally. She claimed the uniforms and marked vehicles were designed for visibility and deterrence, not to deceive. I explained that regardless of intent, the effect was intimidation and confusion. People need to clearly understand who has legal authority and who doesn't. At one point, she asked, "So what do you want from us?" I answered plainly, "Stop impersonating police officers, remove the badges, the police-like vehicles, and retrain your staff on the legal limits of private security. Work with local law enforcement instead of trying to replace it." After a long discussion, it was clear there would be resistance. The company had invested in this image, and the HOA board was reluctant to back down. But I wasn't there just to negotiate. I was there to assert my authority and protect my community. Later that day, I visited the HOA board meeting to address these concerns directly with the residents and board members. Standing before the room, I introduced myself formally, emphasizing my role not just as police chief, but as a neighbor who valued community trust. I laid out the facts, the legal boundaries of private security, the risks of impersonation, and the incidents reported. I revealed how their security team's actions had crossed the line. The room was divided. Some residents expressed relief that the police chief was taking this seriously. Others were defensive of the HOA, fearing that limiting security would make the neighborhood less safe. I addressed those concerns head-on. Real safety comes from cooperation, clear roles, and respect for rights. When private security pretends to be police, it undermines trust and can lead to dangerous misunderstandings. Then I shared my personal story, how I had been stopped on my bike, how they didn't recognize me, and how this situation could happen to anyone. It was a moment of candor and vulnerability that resonated with many. By revealing my true identity and standing firm, I shifted the narrative. No longer was I just a resident complaining. I was the law enforcement leader demanding accountability. That confrontation marked a turning point. The HOA board agreed to temporarily halt the use of police-like uniforms and vehicles pending a formal review. Sentinel Guardians promised to retrain their officers and revise their policies. More importantly, the residents began to understand the importance of clear boundaries and legal authority. For me, this wasn't just about correcting a mistake. It was about reclaiming the integrity of law enforcement and protecting the community from confusion and fear. The confrontation was uncomfortable, challenging, and at times frustrating. But it was necessary, because sometimes to reveal the truth, you have to reveal yourself. Understanding the legal limits of homeowners associations and their security personnel is crucial to resolving conflicts like the one I faced in Willow Creek. After the confrontation with Sentinel Guardians and the HOA board, it became clear that the core issue wasn't just the behavior of individual security officers. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of what HOAs can and cannot legally do. Homeowners associations are private entities created by property developers to maintain shared community standards and manage common areas. Their powers come from the governing documents, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS, which homeowners agree to when they purchase property in the neighborhood. Within these guidelines, HOAs can enforce rules about landscaping, noise, parking, and architectural standards. They can impose fines or suspend privileges for violations. However, HOAs are not law enforcement agencies. They do not have the authority to arrest, detain, or conduct investigations like police officers. Their enforcement powers are limited to civil actions, such as fines or liens, and only within the scope of the community's governing documents. When an HOA hires a private security firm, those guards are considered private citizens with no special legal powers beyond what any citizen has. They can, at most, ask individuals to leave private property or report criminal activity to the police. They cannot perform traffic stops, demand identification without cause, or impersonate law enforcement officers. Doing so can be illegal and expose the HOA and security company to lawsuits. In my city of Fairhaven, as in many jurisdictions, laws are clear about impersonation of a police officer. It is a felony offense for any person to wear a badge, uniform, or use a vehicle designed to resemble official police equipment with the intent to deceive. This protects the public from confusion and potential abuse. I consulted legal experts who confirmed that the HOA's actions in Willow Creek bordered on illegal impersonation. The private security officers' badges and police-style vehicles were more than mere costumes. They were tools of deception. Furthermore, state statutes often require private security personnel to be licensed and to undergo training that clearly defines their limits. Sentinel Guardians was licensed but had no authority to act beyond private security, yet their behavior suggested otherwise. There's also the matter of civil rights. Residents stopped or detained by private security, acting as police, could argue that their Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure were violated. If an officer without legal authority demands ID or tries to detain someone, that person can refuse. Yet many residents, intimidated by the uniforms and badges, comply out of fear. This intimidation can chill community life and foster resentment. The HOA board, meanwhile, seemed to believe that expanding security powers would deter crime and maintain property values. But this ignores the legal realities and risks, exposing the HOA to liability. In my role as police chief, I emphasized the importance of cooperation between HOAs and local law enforcement rather than replacement. Homeowners associations should report suspicious or criminal activity to the police and let trained officers handle investigations and enforcement. I also recommended that the HOA revise its contract with Sentinel Guardians to clearly outline prohibited behaviors, especially anything resembling law enforcement functions. Uniforms and vehicles should be distinct from police to avoid confusion. During a community forum, I presented these legal boundaries in plain language to residents and board members. I explained that while the HOA could enforce rules through fines and restrictions, they could not, and must not, step into the role of police officers. I shared examples of other communities where HOAs had gotten into legal trouble for overstepping, including lawsuits and criminal charges for impersonation. This education helped shift opinions. Some board members who had initially supported the aggressive security tactics admitted they had not fully understood the legal consequences. With legal counsel's guidance, the HOA agreed to implement reforms, remove police-like insignia, limit security officers' authority to observation and reporting, and establish a clear protocol for involving actual police in any incidents. These steps were essential not only for protecting residents' rights, but also for preserving the community's reputation and peace of mind. Legal boundaries aren't just bureaucratic red tape. They are the safeguards that protect individuals and communities alike. When those boundaries are ignored or blurred, confusion, fear, and abuse follow. My experience showed that education and clear communication are key to enforcing these limits. Because in the balance between community order and individual freedom, the law must always be the guide. And in Willow Creek, that lesson was finally being learned. After the confrontation with the HOA security firm and the board, the issue of private security overreach became a hot topic in Willow Creek. What had started as a personal incident had morphed into a community-wide conversation about safety, rights, and trust. The residents, my neighbors, were the ones most affected by the actions of Sentinel Guardians, and their voices were crucial in shaping the next steps. I decided to hold an open forum at the community center, inviting all residents to come forward and share their experiences. I wanted people to speak candidly about what they had endured, what they feared, and what they hoped for moving forward. It was important for me as police chief and as a member of the community to listen. The turnout was larger than I expected. Dozens of residents filled the room, some hesitant at first but gradually opening up as others shared their stories. One elderly couple spoke about how the security officers stopped their teenage grandson for riding his bike after dusk. The officers demanded identification and threatened to fine him for loitering, even though he was on a public sidewalk. The family felt intimidated and uncertain about their rights. Another resident recounted how Sentinel officers followed her home after a neighbor complaint about loud music, demanding to see her ID and questioning her guests. She described the experience as invasive and humiliating. Parents spoke of children afraid to play outside, worried that a simple bike ride or gathering with friends could draw unwanted attention or even legal trouble. Several residents shared stories of neighbors who had been issued fines for minor infractions without clear explanations or due process. They worried that the HOA's approach was less about safety and more about control. Some, however, supported the HOA's security efforts. They expressed concern about property crime in nearby areas and felt that a visible security presence deterred troublemakers. They feared that scaling back Sentinel's role might make Willow Creek vulnerable. The room was divided, but the underlying sentiment was unanimous. The current approach was flawed and needed reevaluation. I listened carefully, validating concerns on both sides. Safety is a shared responsibility, I told them. We want to protect our community without sacrificing our rights and freedoms. Residents also raise questions about accountability. Who monitors the HOA security firm? What oversight exists to prevent abuse? How can residents challenge unfair citations or harassment? These were vital issues, and I promised to work with the HOA board and city officials to create transparent policies and a complaint process. Many residents admitted they had been confused about the roles of HOA security versus the city police. Some didn't know who to call in emergencies, and others hesitated to involve police for fear of retaliation or misunderstanding. I took the opportunity to clarify these roles. The police respond to crimes and emergencies, enforce laws, and protect constitutional rights. The HOA security guards are private contractors who monitor compliance with community rules but cannot enforce laws or detain individuals. This education empowered residents to better understand their rights and how to interact with both groups appropriately. The forum also sparked grassroots organizing. Several community members volunteered to form a neighborhood watch program, working alongside the police department to enhance safety without overstepping boundaries. I encouraged these efforts, knowing that community engagement is one of the most effective ways to maintain a safe and welcoming neighborhood. In the days and weeks that followed, I received numerous messages from residents thanking me for listening and acting. Some expressed relief that their concerns were being heard at the highest level. Others urged me to continue pushing for reforms within the HOA and Sentinel Guardians. The community's response was a reminder of why I chose law enforcement, to serve and protect people, not just enforce rules. It was also a lesson in the power of dialogue and transparency. When residents feel heard and informed, fear and suspicion give way to cooperation and trust. The experience strengthened my resolve to ensure that private security firms operate within their legal limits and that residents' rights are always respected. Because a community is only as strong as the trust between its people and those who serve them. And in Willow Creek, that trust was beginning to heal. While the residents and I were grappling with the confusion and fear caused by the HOA's private security force, I realized it was critical to understand the other side of the story, the perspective of the HOA board members themselves. After all, they were the decision-makers responsible for hiring Sentinel Guardians and shaping the security policies in Willow Creek. HOA boards are often composed of volunteers, homeowners who invest their time and energy in managing the community. Their motivations usually stem from a desire to maintain property values, uphold community standards, and ensure safety. But managing a neighborhood, balancing budgets, and responding to residents' complaints is a complex and often thankless task. I arranged a private meeting with several board members to get a candid view of their challenges, intentions, and concerns. The meeting opened with a palpable mix of defensiveness and genuine frustration. "We never intended for Sentinel to act like police," one board member said. "We hired them to keep an eye on things, reduce vandalism, and address the rising crime in nearby neighborhoods. Another added, "We get calls all the time from worried residents who want more security. Sometimes we feel like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to keep the community safe while respecting people's rights." It was clear that the board had been under pressure from residents demanding action, from the rising crime rates in the region, and from their own limited resources. The board members described Sentinel Guardians as a solution to these concerns. The security company's visible presence was intended to deter trouble and provide peace of mind. They acknowledged that the officers' uniforms and vehicles had been designed to be noticeable, but argued that any resemblance to police was unintentional. One board member said, "We thought the badges and SUVs would help command respect and authority, but we never wanted anyone to think Sentinel had arrest powers. If that happened, it was a mistake." I pointed out that perception is as important as intent. When people see badges and police-style vehicles, they assume law enforcement authority. This assumption can lead to fear, confusion, and even legal problems. The board members nodded, admitting that they hadn't fully anticipated the consequences of their choices. Budget constraints were a recurring theme. The HOA's operating budget was tight, limiting their ability to hire professional law enforcement or install security cameras and other infrastructure. Sentinel Guardians was a relatively affordable option that seemed to offer a quick fix. One board member said, "We're not police experts. We rely on the security company's advice and professionalism, but maybe we didn't ask enough questions or set clear expectations." Their candor was refreshing. It revealed how well-meaning intentions can go astray without proper oversight and knowledge. We also discussed the legal risks. I explained the potential liability the HOA faced for allowing security officers to impersonate police, including lawsuits and criminal charges. The board expressed concern. "We don't want to put the community at risk or damage our reputation," said the president. I assured them that reforms were not about punishment, but about protecting everyone involved. Clear policies, proper training, and cooperation with local law enforcement would improve safety and reduce liability. The board also expressed frustration with some residents who were resistant to any changes or critical of their efforts. I encouraged empathy on both sides. We all want the same thing: a safe, vibrant community where people feel respected. But achieving that requires listening, learning, and adapting. Before the meeting ended, we discussed next steps: revising the Sentinel contract, clarifying roles, improving communication, and educating residents. The board agreed to establish a joint task force, including residents, board members, security personnel, and law enforcement representatives to oversee these changes. Leaving the meeting, I reflected on the complexity of managing community security. It's easy to criticize from the outside, but those making decisions face competing demands and tough choices. This experience taught me that sustainable solutions require collaboration, transparency, and mutual respect. By understanding the HOA board's perspective, I gained insight into the challenges behind the scenes and a clearer path forward. Because protecting a community isn't just about enforcing rules, it's about building trust from all angles. Following the meetings, conversations, and heated debates, it was clear that Willow Creek needed change, a fundamental shift in how community safety was approached. The incidents involving Sentinel Guardians' overreach had exposed systemic problems, and the trust between residents, the HOA, and security personnel had been shaken. But crises often present opportunities, and this was our chance to rebuild with better policies, clearer boundaries, and renewed cooperation. The first order of business was reforming the HOA's security contract with Sentinel Guardians. Together with the HOA board and legal advisors, I helped draft new contract terms that explicitly defined the limits of the security firm's authority. Gone were the days when the guards could stop residents or demand IDs under the guise of law enforcement. Instead, the contract emphasized observation, reporting, and de-escalation. Security officers were to act as the eyes and ears of the community, alerting police to genuine criminal activity rather than trying to enforce rules themselves. Their role was to provide a visible deterrent while respecting the legal rights of residents. Uniforms and vehicles were redesigned. The new uniforms retained professional elements, but removed police-like badges and insignias. The vehicles no longer sported faux emergency lights or police-style decals. This visual differentiation was crucial to prevent future confusion and to ensure residents could easily distinguish between private security and official law enforcement. Training became a central focus. Sentinel officers underwent comprehensive retraining, covering legal limits, residents' rights, conflict resolution, and cultural sensitivity. This was not about creating mini-police, but skilled security personnel who understood their role and responsibilities. We also introduced mandatory regular reviews and audits to ensure compliance with the new policies. The HOA board committed to more active oversight, requiring Sentinel to submit monthly activity reports and to hold quarterly meetings with residents and law enforcement representatives. Another key reform was establishing a transparent complaint process. Residents now had clear channels to report misconduct or grievances involving security officers. Complaints would be investigated promptly and impartially, and outcomes communicated to the complainants. Communication between the HOA, security personnel, and the police department improved significantly. We set up a direct liaison system so that security could quickly contact the police when necessary and receive guidance on handling incidents. Community education was also prioritized. I organized workshops and distributed informational materials clarifying residents' rights and the distinct roles of HOA security and municipal police. Empowering people with knowledge was essential to reducing fear and misunderstanding. One of the most exciting developments was the formation of a neighborhood watch program. Volunteer residents committed to patrolling, reporting suspicious activity, and fostering community spirit. Supported by the police department, this grassroots initiative helped restore a sense of ownership and mutual care within Willow Creek. Throughout the reform process, transparency remained a guiding principle. The HOA board hosted open meetings to update residents on changes and listen to ongoing concerns. This openness helped rebuild trust and allowed the community to participate actively in shaping their safety. The shift was not without challenges. Some residents remained skeptical or resistant to change, and Sentinel Guardians had to adjust to new expectations and restrictions. However, the overall atmosphere improved as everyone began to see the benefits of clear roles, respect for rights, and collaboration. As police chief, I took personal responsibility to oversee the implementation of these reforms and to maintain open lines of communication. I wanted residents to know that their concerns mattered and that law enforcement was on their side, not above them. Looking back, the reform efforts in Willow Creek became a model for other communities facing similar challenges with HOA security. The lessons learned about authority, perception, legal boundaries, and community engagement proved invaluable. Ultimately, these reforms transformed Willow Creek's approach to safety from a source of fear and division into a foundation for cooperation and respect. Because a safer community isn't built on fear or confusion, it's built on trust, clarity, and shared responsibility. And in Willow Creek, we were building that foundation together. As the dust settled in Willow Creek and the reforms began to take root, I found myself reflecting deeply on the journey I had been through. From being stopped by private security officers who didn't recognize me as their police chief, to leading a community-wide effort for change, the experience reshaped my understanding of authority, trust, and the delicate balance between order and freedom. One of the first lessons was that authority is not simply about titles, badges, or uniforms. Authority is about legitimacy, earned through respect, transparency, and accountability. My incident with Sentinel Guardians revealed how easy it is for people to mistake the symbols of authority for actual power, and how dangerous that confusion can be. The private security officers wore police-like badges and drove vehicles resembling patrol cars, which led many residents to believe they had real law enforcement powers. This misunderstanding bred fear and mistrust. It taught me that the appearance of authority can sometimes be as influential and as misleading as its reality. I also learned that good intentions are not enough. The HOA board's desire to protect their community was genuine, but without a clear understanding of legal limits and the consequences of their choices, their efforts backfired. This showed me the importance of education, not just for residents but for those in leadership positions as well. Communication emerged as a crucial factor. Many problems stemmed from a lack of clear dialogue between the HOA, the security company, residents, and the police department. Miscommunication and assumptions fueled fear and resentment. When we opened the channels of communication, invited dialogue, and shared information openly, relationships improved dramatically. I realized that law enforcement is not just about enforcing rules, it's about serving people. As police chief, I am charged with upholding the law, but also with protecting civil rights and building trust. The Willow Creek situation reminded me that when enforcement oversteps or appears overbearing, it alienates the very community it aims to protect. Another powerful insight was the importance of community involvement. Residents who took part in the forums, the neighborhood watch, and the reform efforts demonstrated the strength of collective action. When people feel empowered and included, they become partners in safety rather than subjects of enforcement. The experience also reinforced my belief in the rule of law. Laws exist to protect rights and maintain order, but they must be understood and respected by all parties, whether public police or private security. Blurring the lines between these roles risks undermining legal protections and community trust. I learned to appreciate the complexity of managing a community's safety. Balancing security needs with civil liberties is a delicate task that requires wisdom, patience, and humility. Personally, the ordeal deepened my empathy for residents who feel vulnerable or intimidated by authority, whether it comes from police or private guards. It reminded me to always listen carefully, to treat people with dignity, and to be vigilant against any form of overreach. It also strengthened my resolve to foster partnerships between law enforcement, community leaders, and residents. Together, we can create environments where safety and freedom coexist. Lastly, I recognize that no one is above learning from their mistakes. The HOA board, Sentinel Guardians, and I all had to confront uncomfortable truths, adapt, and grow. That willingness to reflect and change is essential for progress. In retrospect, being stopped by fake cops on my bike was a humbling experience that challenged my assumptions and propelled me to act, not just as a police chief, but as a neighbor. It showed me that authority must be exercised responsibly, and that communities thrive when everyone respects boundaries and works together. Most importantly, it taught me that leadership is about service and connection, not just power. As Willow Creek moves forward, I carry these lessons with me, hopeful that they will guide us toward a safer, more just, and more united future. As the reforms settled in and Willow Creek began to heal from the turmoil caused by Sentinel Guardians' overreach, my focus shifted toward the future. how to sustain progress, build lasting trust, and create systems that hold all parties accountable. The past months had exposed vulnerabilities in our community's approach to security and governance, but they also opened the door for real transformation. Moving forward required vigilance, commitment, and collaboration. Trust is the foundation of any safe and healthy community. Without trust, rules become weapons, authority becomes suspicion, and neighbors become strangers. Rebuilding trust after conflict is difficult, but essential. It requires honesty, transparency, and consistent actions that demonstrate respect for residents' rights and concerns. One of the first steps we took was establishing a permanent Community Safety Advisory Committee. This committee, made up of residents, HOA board members, Sentinel representatives, and police liaisons, serves as a forum for ongoing dialogue. It reviews security operations, hears residents' feedback, and recommends policy adjustments. By giving the community a direct voice in oversight, we empowered people to participate actively in shaping their neighborhood's safety. Accountability mechanisms were also strengthened. Sentinel Guardians agreed to enhanced monitoring, including random audits, body cameras on officers, and clear disciplinary procedures for misconduct. These measures not only protect residents but also safeguard security personnel from unfounded accusations. The HOA committed to publishing quarterly reports on security activities and board decisions related to safety. Transparency ensures that actions are visible and open to public scrutiny, reducing rumors and mistrust. Education remains a cornerstone of our strategy. We continue to hold regular workshops and distribute materials explaining residents' rights, security protocols, and how to engage constructively with both private security and police. An informed community is a confident community. At the same time, we expanded collaboration with local law enforcement. The police department increased its patrols in Willow Creek and improved response times. We also organized joint training sessions where Sentinel officers and police officers learned from each other, fostering mutual understanding and respect. Beyond security, we recognize the importance of building community bonds. Initiatives like neighborhood block parties, volunteer cleanups, and youth programs help strengthen social ties and create a sense of belonging. When neighbors know and care for one another, safety improves naturally. As police chief, I made it a priority to remain accessible and engaged. I hold monthly town halls, respond personally to concerns, and work closely with the HOA and residents. Leadership requires not just authority, but humility and approachability. The lessons from the Sentinel incident extend beyond Willow Creek. Many communities face similar challenges balancing private security, homeowners associations, and public law enforcement. Our experience underscores the need for clear boundaries, proper training, and shared responsibility. I hope our story serves as a reminder that no single entity can ensure community safety alone. It is a collective effort requiring cooperation, respect, and accountability. Looking ahead, I am cautiously optimistic. The reforms are not perfect and challenges remain, but the dialogue is open, the community is engaged, and the commitment to protect rights while enhancing safety is strong. The journey taught me that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, not overnight, but through sustained effort and genuine care. For Willow Creek, moving forward means embracing transparency, encouraging participation, and holding all parties accountable to the highest standards. It means recognizing that safety and freedom are intertwined, and one cannot flourish without the other. And it means remembering that a community is more than just houses. It's the people within them, their hopes, their fears, and their shared dreams. Together, we can build a Willow Creek where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. And that is the true meaning of community.